Marcus Chun adjusted his worn tactical vest as the transport ship's engines hummed to a stop. Through the reinforced viewport, the planet Kythera 7 stretched below like a green and brown nightmare. Massive storm systems swirled across continents, while volcanic ranges glowed like angry scars against the surface. The other candidates in the transport bay had grown increasingly quiet as they approached their destination. "Final approach to Kythera 7, announced the pilot, a gruff Zenthari whose scaled hands gripped the controls with obvious tension. "Weather systems are stable for the next 6 hours. After that, all bets are off." The Galactic Council's Deathworld survival trial was legendary throughout known space. Only the most elite soldiers, explorers, and survival specialists from dozens of species ever attempted it. The challenge was simple in concept, but brutal in execution. Survive 48 hours on one of the galaxy's most hostile worlds with nothing but basic gear. Success meant automatic admission to the Council's prestigious Frontier Corps. Failure usually meant death. Marcus looked around at his fellow candidates. There was Vextar, a 7-foot-tall Krillian warrior whose chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the transport's harsh lighting. His people had evolved on a world of perpetual war, and his 4 arms each carried enough muscle to crush steel. Beside him sat Zephyra, a lithe ethereal whose translucent blue skin contained bioluminescent patterns that pulsed with her emotions. Her species could phase through solid matter for short periods and possessed telepathic abilities that made them excellent scouts. The third candidate was perhaps the most intimidating. Gorak, a massive Ursoid from the ice worlds of the Outer Rim, stood nearly 8 feet tall and weighed close to 400 pounds of muscle and bone. His people were known for their incredible durability and strength, capable of surviving in sub-zero temperatures that would kill most other species within minutes. Then there was Marcus, human, 5 feet 10 inches of what the other species considered average build. No natural armor, no special abilities, no enhanced strength or speed. The betting pools on the transport had him listed as the longest of long shots. Even the ship's crew seemed puzzled by his presence. "Attention candidates," crackled the intercom. "Drop zone approaching. You have 15 minutes to make final equipment checks. Remember, standard survival kit only. No weapons beyond a basic knife. No technology above Tier 2 classification. The planet's surface will be monitored, but rescue is not guaranteed if you trigger your emergency beacon." Marcus opened his standard-issue survival pack and methodically checked each item. Water purification tablets, emergency rations for 3 days, basic medical supplies, fire starter, 50 feet of rope, a small hatchet, and his grandfather's hunting knife. The knife wasn't regulation, but it had been approved after extensive inspection. Its carbon steel blade had been forged on Earth over a century ago, and Marcus had carried it through a dozen campaigns as a human colonial marine. "Human," rumbled Gorak, his voice like grinding stone. "Why do you attempt this trial? Your species is soft, weak. This world will consume you before the first day ends." Marcus finished securing his pack and looked up at the massive alien. "My grandfather once told me that it's not the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight in the dog that matters." Vextar's mandibles clicked in what Marcus had learned was Krillian laughter. "Primitive sayings will not save you from the reality of Kythera 7. The last 3 candidates who attempted this trial were all found as scatterbones. The apex predators of this world make our homeworld's beasts look like pets." "Then, I guess I'll have to be smarter than the predators," Marcus replied simply. The ship shuddered as it entered the planet's atmosphere. Through the viewports, the ground rushed up to meet them with alarming speed. Kythera 7's surface was a patchwork of dense jungle, volcanic badlands, and acid swamps. The drop zone appeared to be a small clearing surrounded by towering trees whose trunks were easily 20 feet in diameter. "Drop zone secured," announced the pilot. "No immediate hostiles detected, but that can change fast. You have 60 seconds from touchdown to disembark. Good luck, candidates. Try not to become something's dinner." The transport touched down with a heavy thud, and The rear cargo bay began to open with a pneumatic hiss. Immediately, the sounds and smells of an alien world flooded in. The air was thick and humid, carrying the sense of exotic vegetation and something else Marcus couldn't identify. A low, rhythmic thumping echoed from somewhere in the jungle, like a massive heartbeat. "Time to go," Marcus said, shouldering his pack. The 4 candidates disembarked onto the planet's surface. The ground beneath their feet was spongy with layers of decomposing vegetation, and the air shimmered with heat despite the thick canopy overhead. Massive insects buzzed between the trees, some as large as dinner plates, their wings creating a constant droning symphony. Candidates deployed. The pilot's voice called from the transport. "Timer starts now. 48 hours to survival certification. Signal strength will degrade once we achieve orbital distance." The transport's engines roared back to life, and within moments, the ship had disappeared through the canopy, leaving the 4 candidates alone on one of the most dangerous worlds in known space. Vextar immediately began scanning the area with his compound eyes, his head rotating nearly 300 degrees as he searched for threats. Zephyra closed her eyes and extended her telepathic senses, her bioluminescent patterns shifting to a deep purple that Marcus had learned indicated concentration. Gorak simply stood and sniffed the air, his enhanced senses analyzing scent trails and chemical compositions. Marcus did what humans had always done best. He observed, adapted, and started making plans. The clearing was roughly circular, about 50 meters across. The soil was dark and rich, with small streams of clear water running along the eastern edge. The trees surrounding them were unlike anything in the galactic databases, their bark having an almost metallic sheen and leaves that seemed to shift color as they moved in the breeze. More importantly, Marcus noticed that the vegetation growth patterns suggested this clearing was maintained, not natural. "Something lives here," he announced to the group. "This clearing isn't random. Look at the way the undergrowth is trimmed back, and those worn paths leading into the jungle." "Irrelevant," Gorak grunted. "We find shelter, establish defensive positions, survive until extraction. Simple. Maybe for you," Zephyra said, her voice like musical chimes. "But I'm detecting multiple intelligent presences in the surrounding area, and they're curious about us." As if summoned by her words, a low growl echoed from the tree line to their north. Then another from the east, and another from the south. Within moments, the candidates found themselves surrounded by sounds of unseen predators. "Defense formation," Vextar commanded, his warrior training taking over. Backs together, weapons ready. But Marcus was studying the pattern of the growls, the timing and location of each sound. His grandfather had been a hunter back on Earth's frontier worlds and had taught him that understanding your environment was more important than fighting it. "Wait," Marcus said, holding up a hand. "They're not hunting us. They're talking." "Humans and their delusions," Gorak snorted, but he paused his advance toward the tree line. The growls continued, but Marcus noticed they had a cadence to them, almost like conversation. And, more importantly, none of the creatures had actually appeared or made any aggressive moves. They were announcing themselves, establishing territory, but not attacking. "We need to respond," Marcus said, much to the surprise of the other candidates. "Respond how, human?" Vextar demanded. Marcus cupped his hand around his mouth and let out a loud, clear whistle. The jungle fell silent for a moment, then erupted in what could only be described as excited chatter. Different calls came from multiple directions, but still no creatures appeared. "Fascinating," Zephyra said, her patterns shifting to bright yellow. "The telepathic signatures suggest amusement? They're curious about the human." "Great," Gorak muttered. "The local predators think we're entertaining. That will make excellent last words." But Marcus was already moving, walking slowly toward the edge of the clearing. He kept his hands visible and his movements deliberately non-threatening. As he approached the tree line, a massive shape detached itself from the shadows. The creature was unlike anything in the galactic databases. It stood nearly 10 feet tall on powerful hind legs, with a body that seemed part reptile, part mammal. Its hide was covered in dense, dark fur marked with bioluminescent stripes that pulsed with a steady rhythm. Most remarkably, its eyes held unmistakable intelligence. The other candidates tensed, ready to fight or flee, but Marcus simply stopped and waited. The creature studied him for a long moment, then made a sound that was almost like a purr. It approached slowly, lowered its massive head, and sniffed at Marcus with obvious curiosity. "Incredible," breathed Zephyra. "It's trying to communicate." Marcus slowly reached into his pack and withdrew one of his emergency rations. He broke off a small piece and offered it to the creature, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. The creature sniffed the food, then gently took it with surprising delicacy for something with such massive jaws. The effect was immediate. The creature's bioluminescent stripes began pulsing in a rapid, complex pattern, and similar patterns appeared throughout the jungle as other creatures responded. Within moments, a dozen of the massive beings had emerged from the treeline, all focused on Marcus with obvious interest. "This is impossible," Vextar said, his mandibles clicking rapidly. "These creatures should be apex predators. They should be attacking us, not whatever this is." "Maybe that's the point," Marcus said, slowly backing away from the creatures toward his fellow candidates. "Maybe surviving here isn't about fighting the environment. Maybe it's about understanding it." The largest of the creatures, the first one Marcus had encountered, made a series of complex sounds that were clearly directed at the human. Then it turned and walked to a specific spot near the edge of the clearing. It looked back at Marcus and repeated the sounds. "It wants you to follow," Zephyra said, her telepathic abilities picking up the creature's intent. "It's trying to show you something." "This is madness," Gorak declared. "Following an unknown predator into hostile territory is suicide." "Everything here is hostile territory," Marcus replied. "But these creatures have lived here for who knows how long. They know how to survive. Maybe they can teach us." Against the protests of his fellow candidates, Marcus followed the massive creature into the jungle. The path was well-worn and clearly maintained, winding between trees that seemed to grow in deliberately organized patterns. Other creatures flanked them as they walked, but none made any threatening moves. After about 10 minutes of walking, they emerged into another clearing. But this one was clearly artificial. Structures made from woven branches and some kind of natural cement dotted the area. The creatures had built a settlement. The large creature led Marcus to the center of the settlement, where a circular depression had been carved into the ground and lined with smooth stones. It was filled with clear, fresh water. The creature gestured toward the water, then toward Marcus, then made the same sound it had made earlier. "They're offering you water," Zephyr said, having followed despite her better judgment. "Clean, fresh water. They're being hospitable." Marcus knelt by the water source and cupped some in his hands. It was crystal clear and tasted better than anything from his purification tablets. As he drank, more creatures emerged from the structures around the settlement. Some were smaller, clearly juveniles, while others were elderly with graying fur and slower movements. "They're not predators," Marcus realized aloud. "They're people, a tribe, a civilization." The implications hit him like a thunderbolt. This wasn't just a death world populated by mindless beasts. It was home to an intelligent species that had learned to not just survive, but thrive in one of the galaxy's most hostile environments. And for some reason, they were welcoming him. The leader creature began a series of vocalizations while pointing to different parts of the settlement. It was clearly giving Marcus a tour, showing him how they had adapted to their environment. The structures were designed to withstand the planet's violent weather, built into and around the massive trees for protection. Gardens of edible plants grew in carefully tended plots, and Marcus could see evidence of sophisticated tool use and agricultural techniques. "This changes everything," Zephyra whispered. If there's an intelligent species here, the council doesn't know about it. This world isn't just a proving ground, it's home. Marcus finished. This is their home, and we're guests. The leader creature seemed to understand their conversation, even without translation technology. It approached Marcus again and made a series of gentle sounds, then touched his shoulder with one massive clawed hand. The touch was surprisingly gentle, and the creature's bioluminescent patterns pulsed in what Marcus was beginning to recognize as a welcoming display. I think, Marcus said slowly, I'm going to learn more about surviving here than I ever could have imagined. But not in the way the council expects. As if to emphasize his point, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the jungle canopy. The first test was about to begin, and Marcus was beginning to understand that the real challenge wouldn't be fighting Kithra 7. It would be learning to live with it. The creatures around the settlement began moving with obvious purpose, preparing for whatever weather was coming. The leader creature looked at Marcus and gestured toward one of the larger structures. The message was clear: shelter, protection, safety. Marcus turned to his fellow candidates. I don't know what the council expects from this trial, but I think we're about to learn that there's more than one way to survive. The thunder grew louder, and the first drops of rain began to fall through the canopy. But for the first time since landing on Kithra 7, Marcus Chun felt like he might actually have a chance. The storm that hit Kithra 7 6 hours after their arrival made Marcus understand why the planet was classified as a death world. Rain didn't simply fall from the sky. It attacked the ground with the force of liquid bullets. Lightning struck the massive trees with such frequency that the air itself seemed to burn, and winds howled through the jungle with enough force to uproot smaller vegetation. Marcus huddled inside the structure the creatures had offered him, watching through gaps in the woven walls as his fellow candidates struggled to establish shelter in the original clearing. Vextar had attempted to construct a defensive position using fallen logs, but the wind had destroyed it within minutes. Gorak had tried to use his massive strength to dig a bunker, but the ground had turned to liquid mud that refilled faster than he could excavate. Zephyra had phased through solid matter to hide inside a hollow tree trunk, but even that protection looked inadequate against the storm's fury. The creature's settlement, however, remained remarkably stable. The structure swayed and creaked but held firm, designed with an understanding of the planet's weather patterns that came from generations of experience. Marcus watched the leader creature, whom he had mentally named Chief based on the deference the others showed, as it moved through the settlement checking on the other inhabitants. "Your friends struggle," came a voice behind him. Marcus spun around, shocked to hear words in perfect Standard Galactic. Chief stood in the doorway of the structure, its bioluminescent stripes pulsing in what Marcus had learned was a calming pattern. "You can speak our language?" Marcus asked, his mind racing with the implications. Chief's expression, while alien, somehow conveyed amusement. "We have watched the Sky People for many seasons. You're flying metal creatures that bring test takers. We learn, we listen, we understand. But we do not reveal ourselves. Usually, you are different," Chief said simply. "You listen to the forest song. You offer food gift before taking water. You understand that strength is not always fighting." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm. "How long have you been watching the trials? How many candidates have you observed?" Chief sat down across from Marcus, its massive form somehow managing to appear contemplative. "Many seasons, many test takers. Most come with metal teeth and fire weapons. They fight the forest, fight the storm, fight everything. The forest wins. Always. And you just watch them die." "The forest teaches," Chief said with what sounded like sadness. "We cannot save those who will not learn. But you listened when the forest spoke. You answered when we called. You showed respect." Outside, lightning struck close enough to make the structure's walls glow briefly. Marcus could hear Gorak roaring in frustration somewhere in the distance, probably fighting the storm instead of sheltering from it. "Can you help them?" Marcus asked. "My fellow candidates, I mean. They're going to die out there. Chief tilted its massive head. Do they listen to forest song? Do they offer respect gifts? Do they understand the harmony way? Marcus considered his fellow candidates and their behavior since landing. Vextar had immediately taken a military approach, treating the planet as an enemy to be conquered. Gorak had relied purely on brute force and intimidation. Zephyra had been more observant, but still approached everything from a position of superiority, using her abilities to spy on the local inhabitants rather than communicate with them. No, Marcus admitted. They don't. Then, the forest will continue to teach, Chief said with finality. But you have listened. You have learned. Now we will teach you the deeper lessons. Over the next several hours, as the storm raged outside, Chief began to reveal the true nature of Kithera 7. The planet wasn't simply hostile, it was actively intelligent. Not in the way that sentient species were intelligent, but in the way that a complex ecosystem could develop emergent consciousness over geological timescales. The forest mind knows all who walk beneath its branches, Chief explained. It always tests. Those who come with violence and conquest in their hearts find only violence in return. But those who come with respect and understanding find teachers instead of enemies, Marcus finished. Yes, your word understanding is good. Chief went on to explain that his people, who called themselves the Kithani, had evolved alongside the planet's consciousness over millions of years. They didn't fight the environment, they collaborated with it. The storm systems that seemed random to outside observers actually followed predictable patterns that the Kithani had learned to read like weather reports. The dangerous predators that made the planet so feared were actually guardians that the forest mind used to protect itself from those who would cause harm. But why reveal this to me? Marcus asked. Why break the secrecy now? Chief's stripes pulsed in a complex pattern that Marcus was beginning to associate with deep emotion. Because the Testburner people come more often now. More ships, more weapons, more plans to change the forest. The forest mind grows concerned. It asks us to find new allies among the Sky people. Those who understand Harmony Way. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. The Galactic Council wasn't just using Kithera 7 as a testing ground. They were planning something larger. Colonization, perhaps, or resource extraction. And the planet itself was beginning to fight back through the only allies it had ever known. What do you need from me? Marcus asked. Survive the testing time, Chief said immediately. Return to your people. Tell them what you have learned. Make them understand that the forest has friends, not just enemies. And if they don't listen? Chief's expression darkened, and for a moment Marcus caught a glimpse of why the planet was so feared. Then, the forest will teach them as it has taught all the others. But this time, the lessons will not be gentle. The storm began to subside as dawn approached on their first day. Marcus emerged from the Kithani settlement to find a transformed landscape. Trees that had been standing the night before were now fallen across former paths. New streams had formed where the ground had washed away. And in the distance, he could hear the sounds of his fellow candidates dealing with the aftermath. Go to them now, Chief advised. Help them if they will accept help. But remember, the forest watches all actions. Choose wisely. Marcus made his way back to the original clearing to find chaos. Vextar's defensive position had been completely destroyed, and the Krillian warrior was bleeding from multiple cuts where flying debris had found gaps in his natural armor. Gorak was sitting in what remained of his bunker, covered in mud and looking more frustrated than Marcus had ever seen him. Zephyra had managed to stay dry inside her tree hollow, but she looked exhausted from maintaining her phased state for so long. Human, Gorak bellowed when he spotted Marcus. Where have you been? We searched for you when the storm began. I found shelter, Marcus said simply. Better shelter than I could have built myself. Where? Vextar demanded, his compound eyes scanning Marcus's clean, dry appearance. You show no signs of exposure to the storm. That is impossible unless I had help, Marcus finished. Which I did. He proceeded to tell them about the Kithani, about the settlement, about everything Chief had revealed. As he spoke, He watched their faces change from disbelief to suspicion to outright hostility. "You're telling us that you've made contact with an undiscovered intelligent species?" Zephyra said, her patterns cycling through colors Marcus had learned indicated extreme skepticism. "And they just happened to take you in?" "They've been watching the trials for years," Marcus explained. "They understand our languages, our technology, our purposes. They're not primitive savages. They're an advanced civilization that's chosen to remain hidden." "Lies," Gorak spat. "You abandoned your fellow candidates to find easy shelter. Now you create fantasies to justify your cowardice." "Then, come with me," Marcus offered. "Meet them yourself. Learn what I've learned." But even as he spoke, he could sense that it was too late. His fellow candidates had already decided that his story was impossible, that his success was somehow cheating. The prejudices and assumptions that had brought them to Kithra, 7 in the first place, were too deeply ingrained to overcome. "We will survive this trial through strength and skill," Vextar declared, "not through alliances with imaginary creatures. And when we return to the council, we will report your abandonment of duty." Marcus felt a deep sadness settle over him. These beings, representing some of the most advanced military civilizations in the galaxy, couldn't conceive of a solution that didn't involve domination or conquest. They would rather die than admit that there might be another way. "I'm sorry you feel that way," Marcus said, "but the offer stands. If you change your minds, if you need help, I'll be available." "We will not need help from a human," Gorak growled. Marcus nodded and began to turn away, then paused. "One last thing. The storm we just survived? According to the locals, that was just a light rain shower. The real weather starts this evening." He left them to consider that information and made his way back toward the Kithany settlement. But as he walked, he heard Zephyr call after him. "Marcus, wait." He turned to find the ethereal following him, her bioluminescent patterns cycling through colors he couldn't identify. "You're telling the truth, aren't you?" she said softly. "About the intelligent species. I can sense something. Multiple minds, organized thoughts, complex emotions. But they're shielded somehow. They're telepathically aware," Marcus explained. "They know you've been scanning them since we landed. They don't appreciate being spied on." Zephyr's patterns shifted to what Marcus had learned was embarrassment. I didn't realize they were sentient. I thought they were just complex animals." "A lot of people make that mistake," Marcus said. "The question is, are you willing to learn better?" She looked back at her remaining companions, both of whom were already working on new shelter construction with the same forceful approach that had failed them during the storm. "Show me," she said quietly. "Show me these Kithany." The journey back to the settlement took longer with Zephyra in tow, partly because she moved more cautiously than Marcus, and partly because the Kithany were being more selective about revealing themselves. Marcus could sense them in the trees around the path, evaluating this new addition to their group. When they finally reached the settlement, Chief emerged from the central structure, but did not approach as closely as before. Its bioluminescent patterns were more subdued, more cautious. "The Mind Toucher comes," Chief observed. "She has been intrusive." "I apologize," Zephyra said immediately, her own patterns shifting to deep blue. "I didn't understand that you were people. I made assumptions." Chief studied her for a long moment, then made a sound that Marcus had learned was equivalent to a thoughtful hum. "Assumptions kill learning," Chief said finally. "But acknowledgement of error begins wisdom. You may stay, Mind Toucher, but you will observe the courtesy ways. No mind touching without invitation." "Agreed," Zephyr said quickly. And so began Marcus's first real lesson in Kithany survival techniques. With Zephyra as a remarkably quick student, Chief and other members of the tribe began to demonstrate how they had adapted to Kithra 7's challenges. The key, Marcus learned, wasn't to fight the environment, but to work with it. The massive trees weren't obstacles to be cleared, they were partners to be cultivated. The Kithany had developed techniques for encouraging certain growth patterns that provided natural windbreaks, water collection systems, and elevated platforms that stayed dry during floods. Your people build against the forest, Chief explained as he showed them a grove where the trees grew in an almost perfect spiral pattern. We build with the forest. Tree friends grow strong, we grow strong together. The agricultural techniques were even more impressive. Rather than clearing land for farming, the Kithani had learned to identify and encourage edible plants that thrived in the jungle environment. Their farms looked like random patches of jungle to untrained eyes, but were actually carefully managed ecosystems that produced abundant food while maintaining the natural balance. Permaculture, Marcus breathed, recognizing principles his grandfather had taught him from Earth's agricultural history. You've developed permaculture on a planetary scale. Permano-agriculture. Chief sounded out the unfamiliar term. Yes, this word fits. We grow with forest, not against forest. Forest grows strong, we grow strong. As the day progressed, Marcus found himself absorbing more practical survival knowledge than he had learned in all his years of military training. How to read the subtle changes in bioluminescent patterns that indicated incoming weather, which insects were edible and which were dangerous. How to move through the jungle without triggering defensive responses from the various guardian species. But, more importantly, he was learning a completely different philosophy of survival. Instead of dominating the environment through technology and force, the Kithani had learned to become part of the environment. They didn't just live on Kithera 7, they lived as Kithera 7. This is incredible, Zephyra whispered during a break in their lessons. They've achieved a level of ecological integration that my people scientists say is theoretically impossible. And they've done it without any of our advanced technology. Maybe, Marcus suggested, they achieved it because they didn't have our advanced technology. No shortcuts, no quick fixes, just thousands of years of learning to listen. As evening approached, Marcus could see storm clouds gathering on the horizon that made the previous night's weather look like a gentle breeze. Chief noticed his gaze and nodded grimly. Tonight the forest tests deeply, Chief said. Your tribe friends who would not listen, they will face the teaching storm. Many do not survive the teaching storm. Marcus looked back in the direction of the original clearing, where Vextar and Gorak were presumably preparing for another night of struggle against the elements. I have to try to help them, Marcus said. I can't just let them die. Chief's patterns pulsed in what Marcus had learned indicated approval. Yes, this is why the forest chose you, Marcus Human. You understand that strength protects, not conquers. Go, take knowledge gifts. Save them if they will be saved. As Marcus prepared to leave the settlement with arms full of emergency supplies and hard-won survival knowledge, he reflected on how much had changed in just one day. He had come to Kithera 7 expecting to prove himself through individual survival skills. Instead, he was learning that true survival was about community, cooperation, and understanding that no one succeeds alone. The real test was just beginning. Marcus arrived at the original clearing just as the first winds of the teaching storm began to howl through the canopy above. The scene that greeted him was both impressive and terrifying. Vextar and Gorak had managed to construct what could generously be called a fortress using fallen logs, mud, and what appeared to be strips torn from their own equipment. It looked solid enough to withstand conventional weather, but Marcus knew that conventional weather was not what was coming. You return, Gorak observed without looking up from where he was reinforcing a wall joint with his bare hands. Have you come to die with your companions after all? I've come to offer help, Marcus said, setting down the bundle of supplies Chief had given him. There's a worse storm coming tonight. Much worse than last night. Vextar's compound eyes fixed on Marcus with obvious suspicion. And how would you know this? Did your imaginary friends tell you? Rather than argue, Marcus pointed to the horizon where the storm clouds were building. Even to untrained eyes, it was obvious that something massive was approaching. Lightning flickered constantly within the cloud mass, and the air pressure was dropping so rapidly that their ears were popping. Look at the wildlife, Marcus suggested. Notice anything? For the first time, his companions paused their construction work to actually observe their surroundings. The ever-present insect chorus had fallen silent. The bird-like creatures that had been calling from the trees all day had disappeared. Even the small ground-dwelling animals that normally scurried through the undergrowth were nowhere to be seen. "They know something's coming," Zephyrus said quietly. She had remained at the Kithany settlement, but had followed Marcus partway to observe from a safe distance. "The ecosystem is preparing for something significant." "Irrelevant," Vextar declared, but his mandibles were clicking rapidly in what Marcus had learned was a sign of nervousness. "We have shelter. We have weapons. We will survive through preparation and vigilance." Marcus opened the bundle Chief had given him and began removing items. Woven mats made from processed plant fibers that were somehow completely waterproof. Containers of thick, sticky sap that Chief had called storm glue that could seal joints against water and wind. Most importantly, several pieces of what looked like carved wood, but felt as hard as metal. "These are shield anchors," Marcus explained, holding up the carved pieces. "You drive them deep into the ground in a specific pattern. When a storm hits, they create a field that deflects the worst of the wind and lightning. The Kithany have been using them for generations." "Magic trinkets," Gorak snorted, but Marcus could see him studying the carved pieces with interest. "Not magic. Engineering. Based on understanding how the storms work, how the electrical fields form, how the wind patterns flow through this terrain." Marcus began driving the anchors into the ground around their shelter using the techniques Chief had taught him. "The Kithany have had thousands of years to figure this out. We can learn from their experience, or we can reinvent everything from scratch while a killer storm bears down on us." The wind was picking up now, and the first fat drops of rain were beginning to penetrate the canopy. In the distance, they could hear trees beginning to crash to the ground as the storm front approached. "Even if your stories are true," Vextar said, his pride clearly warring with his survival instinct, "accepting help from an undiscovered species would violate the terms of the trial. We are meant to survive through our own skills and resources." Marcus paused in his work to stare at the Krillian warrior. "You think the Council cares more about the technical terms of the trial than whether we live or die? You think they'd rather have dead heroes than living candidates who've made first contact with a new species?" "The trials have rules," Vextar insisted. Honor requires staying alive long enough to report what we've learned," Marcus interrupted. "What's more honorable? Dying because you're too proud to accept help, or surviving to share knowledge that could change how the galaxy views Deathworld exploration?" The argument was cut short by a sound like the world itself tearing apart. The main storm front had reached them, and the teaching storm lived up to its fearsome reputation. Rain fell with the force of bullets, each drop large enough to bruise exposed skin. Lightning struck not just the tallest trees, but seemed to seek out anything metal or elevated. The wind didn't just blow, it actively tried to grab and tear apart anything that stood in its path. Within minutes, it became clear that even the improved shelter wasn't going to be enough. Water was forcing its way through joints that had seemed perfectly sealed. The wind was testing every support structure with focused intensity that felt almost malevolent. And somewhere in the chaos, they could hear the sound of large trees falling with increasing frequency. "The anchors!" Marcus shouted over the roar of the storm. "Help me activate them." Following Chief's instructions, Marcus began connecting the carved pieces with lengths of conductive vine that Chief had provided. The pattern was complex, requiring precise positioning and timing, but as each connection was made, Marcus could feel something changing in the air around them. Gorak, finally, abandoning his pride, threw his massive strength into helping Marcus complete the pattern. Vextar, his military training overcoming his prejudices, used his multiple arms to hold components in place while Marcus and Gorak worked. Even Zephyra emerged from her hiding place to lend her more delicate motor skills to the intricate connections. The moment the final connection was made, the change was dramatic. The shield anchors began to glow with a soft, steady light, and the chaotic winds suddenly had direction and purpose instead of destructive randomness. Lightning strikes that had been targeting their shelter were now being redirected harmlessly into the ground. Rain that had been driving horizontally was now flowing in controlled streams away from their position. Impossible, Vextar breathed, watching water and wind flow around their shelter as if guided by invisible barriers. How can simple carve would create electromagnetic fields? It's not just wood, Marcus realized, studying the anchors more closely in their active state. Chief said they're grown, not carved. These are living trees that have been shaped and trained over decades to channel energy in specific ways. Bioengineering on a level we've never imagined. The teaching storm raged for the rest of the night, but within their protected space, the 4 candidates were safe and dry. More than that, they were beginning to understand that they were dealing with a civilization that had solved problems the Galactic Council's best scientists were still struggling with. "We need to contact the transport," Zephyr said during a lull in the storm. "The Council needs to know about this immediately." But when they tried to activate their emergency communication system, nothing happened. The storm's electromagnetic interference was too intense for their equipment to penetrate. "We're on our own until extraction time," Marcus said. 36 hours to go. "Assuming the extraction ship can even land in this," Gorak muttered, looking out at the ongoing chaos. As dawn broke, the storm began to subside, but the landscape it revealed was dramatically different from the day before. Entire groves of trees had been uprooted and rearranged. New streams had formed where the ground had been scoured away. Several small lakes had appeared overnight in areas that had been dry land the previous evening. "The planet reshapes itself," Marcus said in wonder. "Every storm, every season, the ecology adapts and changes. No wonder the Kithani have learned to work with it instead of against it. Fighting this would be like trying to hold back an ocean." Chief emerged from the jungle as they were surveying the damage, moving with the easy confidence of someone who had weathered countless such storms. Behind him came several other Kithani, including some Marcus hadn't seen before. "Teaching storm is finished," Chief announced. "You have learned to accept help gifts. This is good, but now comes harder testing." "Harder than that?" Gorak asked, gesturing at the transformed landscape. "Storm tests the body," Chief explained. "Now comes testing of the spirit. The Forest Mind will speak with you directly. You must be ready to listen, not just hear." Before any of them could ask what that meant, the ground beneath their feet began to vibrate with a deep, rhythmic pulse. It was the same sound they had heard when they first landed, the heartbeat-like rhythm that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "The Forest Mind awakens," Chief said as bioluminescent stripes beginning to pulse in synchronization with the ground vibrations. "It has felt your presence, tasted your intentions. Now we'll decide if you are worthy of survival." The other Kithani spread out in a wide circle around the candidates, and Marcus realized they were witnesses to some kind of ceremony or trial. The ground vibrations were getting stronger, and he could swear he felt something vast and ancient focusing its attention on them. "What do we do?" Zephyra whispered, her telepathic abilities apparently picking up something that was making her very nervous. "We listen," Marcus said, remembering Chief's words. "We show respect. We prove we're here to learn, not to conquer." The Forest Mind's attention was like standing under a spotlight made of pure awareness. Marcus could feel his thoughts, his intentions, his very character being examined by something infinitely older and more complex than individual consciousness. It was terrifying and humbling at the same time. Images began flashing through his mind. Not his own memories, but visions of Kithara VII's history. He saw the planet before the Kithani, when it was truly a death world of uncontrolled storms and predatory ecosystems. He saw the first primitive ancestors of the Kithani learning to cooperate with the emerging planetary consciousness instead of fighting it. He saw countless generations of collaboration between species and environment that had created the complex harmony that existed today. And he saw the future the Forest Mind feared. Ships from the Galactic Council arriving not as explorers but as conquerors, machines tearing apart the carefully balanced ecosystems, the ancient trees being harvested for their unique properties, the Kithany being displaced or destroyed, the planetary consciousness itself being slowly poisoned and silenced. No, Marcus said aloud, understanding what was being shown to him. That's not why we're here. That's not what this has to be. The ground vibrations paused, and Marcus felt the forest mind's attention focus more intently on him. I'm here to learn, Marcus continued, speaking to the vast consciousness he could feel listening. We all are. Your world has knowledge that could benefit the entire galaxy, but not through conquest or exploitation. Through partnership, through understanding. He felt the other candidates' surprise as they began to receive their own visions from the forest mind. Each was being shown the same potential futures, the same choices, the same consequences. The forest mind asks a question, Chief said, his voice somehow carrying clearly despite the ongoing ground vibrations. Will you return to your people as conquerors who have found new territory to exploit? Or will you return as ambassadors who have found new teachers to learn from? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus could feel the weight of it, the understanding that their answer would determine not just their own survival, but the future relationship between Kithra, Seven, and the wider galaxy. We'll be ambassadors, Marcus said without hesitation. Teachers and students both. There's too much to learn here to waste it on conquest. Agreed, Zephyrus said immediately, her patterns shifting to colors Marcus had never seen before. The telepathic resonance alone, my people could learn so much about ecosystem consciousness. Vextar was slower to respond, his military conditioning warring with what he had experienced. But, finally, his mandibles clicked in what Marcus had learned was acceptance. The Krillian Empire values strength above all. But true strength knows when to fight and when to learn. This is a time for learning. All eyes turned to Gorak. The massive Ursoid had been silent throughout the forest mind's examination, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was unusually quiet. My people have always believed that the strong should protect the weak, he said slowly. I thought that meant we should be the protectors and others should be the protected. But I see now, sometimes the strong learn from those they thought were weak. The ground vibrations ceased immediately, and the sense of vast attention lifted. Chief Stripes pulsed in what Marcus now recognized as joy. The forest mind accepts your words, Chief announced. You have passed the spirit testing. Now you will learn the final lessons before the sky medal returns for you. The remaining time on Kithra, Seven passed in a blur of accelerated education. The Kithany, no longer needing to remain hidden, emerged from the jungle in numbers that surprised even Marcus. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands, representing a fully developed civilization with sophisticated technology, art, and culture. Marcus learned about their symbiotic relationship with the planet's ecosystems, how they had developed biotechnology that worked with living systems instead of replacing them, how they had achieved sustainable abundance without environmental destruction, how they had created a society based on cooperation rather than competition. More importantly, he learned about the forest mind itself. It wasn't a single entity, but a collective consciousness that had emerged from the interaction of all life on the planet over millions of years. The Kithany were its partners, not its subjects, helping to guide and nurture the planetary ecosystem while being supported and protected in return. This is what we've been looking for, Zephyrus said on their final morning. Not worlds to conquer, but worlds to learn from. Kithra, Seven could teach us how to heal the damaged ecosystems on a dozen council worlds. If the council will listen, Vextar said grimly. Not all of our leaders value learning over conquest. Then, we make them listen, Marcus said simply. We have 47 hours and 58 minutes of survival time to report. We've not just survived Kithra, Seven, we've thrived here. That has to count for something. The extraction ship arrived precisely on schedule, descending through the canopy to land in the original clearing. As the four candidates gathered their gear and prepared to leave, Chief approached Marcus one final time. "You have learned much, Marcus Human," the Kithany leader said. "But learning is not finished. It never finishes. Will you remember the forest song when you return to the Metal Sky places?" "I'll remember," Marcus promised. "And I'll make sure others hear it too." As the transport ship lifted off from Kithara 7's surface, Marcus looked down at the jungle that had taught him so much. From above, it looked like any other death world, hostile, chaotic, dangerous. But he knew better now. He knew that beneath the canopy was a civilization that had achieved what the Galactic Council had been seeking for centuries: true harmony between intelligence and environment. The real test was just beginning. Now he had to convince the rest of the galaxy that some things were worth more than conquest. Some things were worth learning from instead of fighting. The ship broke through the planet's atmosphere and headed for the council stations, carrying 4 candidates who had survived the trial. But more importantly, it carried the seeds of a new understanding that could change the galaxy's relationship with the worlds it had labeled as Death Worlds. Marcus Chun had come to Kithara 7 to prove himself as a survivor. He was returning as something much more valuable, a bridge between worlds. 6 months after his return from Kithara 7, Marcus Chun stood before the full Galactic Council assembly, trying not to let his nervousness show. The great chamber buzzed with the voices of representatives from 47 different species, all of whom had read his report, and most of whom thought he was either delusional or lying. "Candidate Chun," spoke Councillor Thexvara, the Zinthari representative whose scaled features showed obvious skepticism. "Your claims about discovering an intelligent species on Kithara 7 are extraordinary. Yet none of our subsequent reconnaissance missions have found any evidence to support your story." "With respect, Counselor," Marcus replied, "your reconnaissance missions have been conducted using the same approach that's failed on Kithara 7 for decades: armed flyovers and hostile scanning. The Kithany have no reason to reveal themselves to forces that approach their world as conquerors." A murmur of discontent rippled through the assembly. Councillor Vorthak, the massive Ursoid representative who shared Gorak's species, leaned forward in his seat. "Are you suggesting that our standard exploration protocols are somehow inadequate, Human?" "I'm suggesting they're inappropriate for first contact with a peaceful species that's been hiding from us for good reason," Marcus answered calmly. The council chamber erupted in angry voices. Several representatives were shouting about human arrogance, about the impossibility of a death world harboring advanced civilization, about the clear fabrication of Marcus's report. Through it all, Marcus remained standing at attention, waiting for the chaos to subside. "Order!" commanded Supreme Counselor Aelin, the ancient ethereal whose authority carried weight across all species. "Candidate Chun, you understand the serious nature of these accusations you're making? You claim not only to have discovered an intelligent species, but to have learned survival techniques that outperform military training from 47 different worlds." "Yes, Counselor. And I claim something else as well. I claim that our entire approach to Death World exploration has been fundamentally flawed from the beginning." The chamber fell silent. No one, especially not a candidate from a species as junior as humanity, challenged the Council's policies so directly. Marcus took a deep breath and continued. "For 3 centuries, we've treated hostile environments as enemies to be conquered. We've sent our best warriors to prove themselves through combat and domination. We've classified entire worlds as worthless because they resist our attempts to subdue them. And in doing so, we've missed the greatest opportunity for advancement that the galaxy has ever seen." "Explain," Supreme Counselor Aelin commanded. Marcus activated the holographic display he'd been given permission to use. Images of Kithara 7 filled the air above the assembly floor, but these weren't the standard reconnaissance photos showing a chaotic jungle world. These were images Marcus had captured during his time with the Kithany, showing the hidden structures, the managed ecosystems, the sophisticated biotechnology. Kithara 7 isn't a death world. Marcus said as the images cycled through scenes of Kithany civilization. It's a garden. A carefully maintained, incredibly advanced garden that we've been too blind to see because it doesn't look like our technology. He gestured to an image showing Kithany bioengineers working with living trees to create structures that were stronger than metal, but completely sustainable. They've solved problems we've been struggling with for generations. Sustainable energy, ecological balance, weather control, biotechnology that works with natural systems instead of against them. Computer-generated fabrications, sneered Counselor Gextar, the Krillian representative. Anyone can create convincing images with sufficient processing power. Then, explain this, said a new voice from the gallery. Vextar stepped forward, his chitin plates gleaming under the chamber's lights. I was there, Counselor. I witnessed everything Candidate Shun has reported. The chamber erupted again as one of their own. A decorated Krillian warrior with an unblemished service record confirmed the human story. Zephyra and Gorak followed, taking positions beside Vextar and Marcus. The telepathic resonance signatures were unlike anything in our databases, Zephyra added, her patterns cycling through colors that indicated absolute certainty. The Kithany have achieved a level of ecosystem integration that our xenobiologists thought was impossible. They save our lives, Gorak stated simply. When our strength and training failed, their wisdom succeeded. Any warrior who cannot learn from superior tactics is no warrior at all. Supreme Counselor Aelin studied the four candidates for a long moment. You're asking us to completely revise our understanding of Deathworld classification. You're asking us to admit that our exploration protocols have been wrong for centuries. I'm asking you to consider the possibility that cooperation might achieve more than conquest, Marcus replied. And I'm asking you to let us prove it. Ow! Marcus had been hoping for this question. He activated another section of his presentation, showing a detailed proposal he'd been working on since his return. Establish a new category of exploration mission. Not conquest or colonization, but cooperation. Send teams trained in xenobiology, ecological systems, and diplomatic first contact instead of military units. And send them to other worlds we've classified as death worlds to see what else we might have missed. Impossible, Counselor Thexvara declared. The military applications alone. If these Kithany possess technology superior to our own, they represent a potential threat that must be assessed and contained. They represent a potential ally, Marcus countered. One that could help us solve ecological crises on dozens of worlds. One that could teach us sustainable development techniques that could benefit the entire galaxy. Or one that could provide bioweapons capabilities to our enemies, Counselor Gextar added. Unknown technology is dangerous technology until proven otherwise. The debate continued for hours, with various council members arguing for everything from immediate military investigation of Kithara 7 to dismissing the entire report as an elaborate hoax. Marcus found himself growing increasingly frustrated with the narrow thinking that seemed to dominate council policy. Finally, Supreme Counselor Aelin called for silence. The matter is too significant to decide hastily. We will recess for deliberation and reconvene tomorrow for a formal vote on Candidate Chen's proposal. As the assembly dispersed, Marcus found himself surrounded by his fellow candidates and a few sympathetic council members. But it was clear from the conversations he overheard that the majority opinion was against him. They're going to send a military expedition, Vextar said grimly. Everything we learned, everything the Kithany taught us, and they're going to respond with force. Not if we can help it, said an unexpected voice behind them. They turned to see Counselor Yelnara, the human representative to the council, and one of the few species members who had been listening intently to Marcus's presentation. Counselor, Marcus said, surprised to be approached by someone of her rank. Walk with me, Candidate Shun, she said, gesturing toward a private corridor. We need to discuss some options that weren't suitable for public debate. They walked in silence until they reached Counselor Yelnara's private office, a space that felt remarkably like a garden despite being located in the center of a space station. Plants from dozens of worlds created a peaceful environment that reminded Marcus strongly of his time with the Kithany. "You've stirred up quite a controversy," Counselor Yelnara said, settling into a chair beside a small water feature. "Half the council thinks you're a liar, and the other half thinks you're a security risk. And what do you think?" "I think you've discovered something that could change the fundamental relationship between intelligent species and their environments. And I think the council is about to make a mistake that could destroy that opportunity forever." Marcus felt a spark of hope. "You believe the report? I believe you've encountered something extraordinary. Whether it's exactly what you think it is remains to be seen. But the potential value is too great to ignore, and the potential cost of mishandling it is too great to risk." Counselor Yelnara activated a privacy screen around her office and leaned forward conspiratorially. "There are those of us who have been questioning the military approach to Deathworld exploration for some time. Your report gives us ammunition to propose an alternative." "What kind of alternative?" "A pilot program. Small scale, minimal military presence, focused on scientific and diplomatic contact. If you're right about the Kithany, we prove it through cooperation rather than conquest. If you're wrong, well, we lose less than we would with a full military expedition." Marcus felt his heart rate accelerate. "You'd support something like that?" "I'd do more than support it. I'd make sure you were in charge of it." The offer took Marcus by surprise. "Me? I'm not even qualified to lead a research expedition. I'm just a former colonial marine who got lucky on a survival trial. You're the only person in the galaxy who successfully made contact with the Kithany," Counselor Yelnara pointed out. "You understand their culture, their language, their methods. More importantly, they trust you. That makes you uniquely qualified to lead exactly the kind of mission we need." Over the next several hours, Counselor Yelnara outlined a proposal that was both ambitious and carefully designed to address the Council's concerns about security and risk. A small team of scientists, diplomats, and cultural specialists would return to Kithara 7 with explicit instructions to establish formal first contact protocols. Marcus would serve as liaison and guide, drawing on his relationship with Chief and the Kithany leadership. "The key is to frame it as a research mission rather than a diplomatic one," Counselor Yelnara explained. "Research missions don't require full council approval, just authorization from the appropriate committee. And the Xenobiology Committee has been pushing for expanded Deathworld studies for years. And if the mission succeeds, if we establish formal relations with the Kithany, then we'll have proven that cooperation can achieve what conquest cannot. And we'll have a model for approaching other worlds we've written off as hostile." The next morning, the council reconvened to vote on Marcus's original proposal. As expected, the military faction carried the day, authorizing a standard reconnaissance mission to Kithara 7 with orders to locate and assess the alleged intelligent species. But what the military faction didn't know was that Counselor Yelnara had already filed the paperwork for her alternative research mission, scheduled to depart 3 weeks before the military expedition. "Time is critical," she told Marcus as they watched the council vote. "We need to reach Kithara 7 first, establish proper contact, and hopefully prevent any misunderstandings that could lead to conflict." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. In 3 weeks, he would be returning to Kithara 7, but this time as the leader of an official mission representing the Galactic Council. The success or failure of that mission would determine not just the fate of the Kithany, but potentially the future of peaceful exploration throughout the galaxy. "What if I'm wrong?" Marcus asked quietly. "What if the Kithany don't want formal contact with the Council? What if I've misunderstood their intentions?" "Then you'll learn from that mistake and adapt," Counselor Yelnara replied. "That's what good leaders do. And based on everything you've told me about your time on Kithara 7, adaptation is something you've already proven you can do." The research ship Harmony departed Council space 2 weeks later, carrying a crew of 23 specialists representing 8 different species. Marcus stood on the bridge as they approached Kithara 7, wondering if Chief would remember him and whether the Kithany would be willing to extend their friendship to a larger group of outsiders. Incoming transmission, announced the communications officer, her tentacles dancing across the control panel. Audio only. Source appears to be the planet's surface. On speaker, Marcus ordered. Chief's familiar voice filled the bridge, speaking in perfect standard galactic. Welcome back, Marcus Human. The Forest Mind has been expecting you. And your new tribe friends. Landing coordinates are being transmitted to your navigation systems. Follow the guidance lights to the prepared meeting place. Marcus smiled for the first time since leaving council space. Thank you, Chief. It's good to hear your voice again. It is good to hear yours, friend of the forest. We have much to show you, much to teach, much to learn together. As the harmony descended through Kithra 7's atmosphere, following a pattern of bioluminescent lights that appeared in the jungle canopy, Marcus realized that the real adventure was just beginning. He had survived the Deathworld trial and convinced the council to try a new approach. Now he had to prove that cooperation between species could achieve something neither could accomplish alone. The planet's surface rose to meet them, green and wild and full of possibilities. Somewhere below, an entire civilization was waiting to share knowledge that could transform the galaxy's understanding of what it meant to truly thrive in harmony with the cosmos. Marcus Chun had come to Kithra 7 as a candidate trying to prove himself worthy of the Frontier Corps. He was returning as something much more important, an ambassador to a future where intelligence and environment could work together instead of against each other. The teaching storm had passed. Now came the real test of everything he had learned.